As Chrylsis mourned the loss, he turned to the other hosts. They discussed what had transpired, and then the recovering host that had stood their ground upon the Prime informed them of what he had seen. He told them that the Unstoppable One had done this, that they had engineered this downfall, and that they were clearly free to wreak havoc upon the Primes once more. He had not heeded the warning of Thalassiac, and now measures to protect them all, as well as the Primes, must be taken. First, Chrylsis needed some way of sealing the Primes, but he could not find one, short of disconnecting them from the very planes and energies that gave them their uniqueness. This could not be so. Then he would have to form some kind of sword to fight him, an entity capable of battling him on his own terms, perhaps one such as him, but no. Such a thing would be a folly, for the same would most likely happen again, and he could not risk such a mistake. As he put these ideas forward, the leading hosts from those who had banded together to become elevated offered a suggestion, a possible solution to their problem. They themselves were born of daemonhood, as was he, and as such each daemon had a true name. Those true names were powerful, and if known, such knowledge would allow control and nullification of a daemon's powers. This was something that mortals on the Primes knew well, and would go to any lengths to obtain. Daemons could not use such magic to control others of their ilk, for being born of one and the same, such magics would wreak havoc upon them. But the suggestion was flawed, and for one simple reason. No daemon knew the name of him. They had never known his name, only that he was beyond them, taken into the heavens above the Primes, and then returned, shunned to the fallen Prime, that once held the rights of ascension. Chrylsis smiled and shook his head. Such knowledge was not even imparted to me by the Source, nor could I divine such from him. Even as I wove his divinity into him, he is truly nameless.
Then that is what we shall know him as, the leading host member said. The Nameless One.
Chrylsis considered this, and nodded. Let it be done. He now has an identity, but thankfully none of the Primes know of this, or of his existence at this time, other than those who have been felled by his power. He paced for a minute, and then turned to the hosts. Go to the Primes you hold in sway. Seed the existence of the Nameless One. But do not do it yourselves directly. We must create some way of delivering such without a trace to ourselves. But we have such a way, a voice said, faint and weak, barely audible. You already have an agent. The voice came from a host, or rather from a small tether that was touching their realms. Chrylsis poured power to it and peered to where it was coming from. There he saw a familiar face, a lost host, one who had been taken, but it was smaller, lesser, somehow mortal. Thalassiac tore me from his grasp many years past, and I have spent that time watching and listening from where Thalassiac left me, in a place known as Lassashar. The group of hosts and Dominion nodded, and mentioned that this place existed upon their prime. Chrylsis nodded and motioned for his old friend to continue. While I was part of him, I saw everything. I witnessed his horrors, the pain he feels, the destruction he caused. But I could also feel the hosts he took writhing in agony eternal, as was I. I learned much from his actions and much of his plans, and I fear things are more dire than we imagined. Jurakai, please, calm yourself. We have time to...
We have no time to stop this,
he cried out, his voice wavering from the effort as his body was clearly being torn from making his connection.
He has been ahead of us since the first day, and I fear from what I have learned inside him that something grows within his form, and it is something not of the source. Yes, he has an insatiable hunger. He has the same as his progenitor's spine. But this is different somehow, as though it is trying to unify us all into one.
Chrylsis sat down, falling back as though a heavy weight was placed upon him as his legs buckled. "No," he said quietly. The other host stood waiting for a reply, a response, anything, but for many minutes it was silent, until Jerikai spoke again.
"I must break this connection, as it's hard to maintain, but I will search you out in Dominia,"
he said. But the leader of the group finished saying, "No, we will meet you in Dominia," and turned his attention immediately to his prime, to meet with his lost light as soon as possible. Chrylsis took many long pauses of trying to speak, before he eventually told them. "The source. It is the source of all daemon kind, as you know, sitting beyond our sight, beyond our influence. It is slowly corrupting all of reality, and as I once discovered, even our own kind. I met directly with the source at one time, aeons past, where we fought for the first time. It was able to slice parts of me off and mould them into effigies, such as you, to use against me, and quickly I was overwhelmed and had to retreat. These became the first templates for the daemons we have now at our doors. This was before most of you existed, so do not show such alarm." He smiled weakly at the many faces of shock and concern. "Those parts of me he cut away, that he used to craft those initial daemons, of myth that I doubt any of you know. They were titanic monstrosities, capable of unspeakable destruction, but I managed over time to regain almost all of them through my own battling with them, and I have almost all of my pieces again, all apart from 2. One of those pieces was moulded into what was now known as Terraspine, and now it seems the other was gifted to me, enshrouded within a shell of daemonic power. I could not sense myself inside of it, and I doubt it even knows it is there itself. The source plans to rip us apart from within, using this Nameless One to accomplish it." One of the hosts stepped forward and spoke.
"And this is why he wishes to attack us, destroy you, take what you have created. That dark part of you that was infused by the source is driving the Nameless One forward and forcing it to do these unspeakable things."
Chrylsis nodded. "Yes, it would seem so. It is not a daemon trying to battle with its identity as a god, but a demonic god, seed, trying to forcefully control a daemon inside a god's form, to enact the source's own designs, and with all the power it is amassing, perhaps it will succeed, eventually." He drew himself up to his full height, seemingly renewed with intention. "But he will not do it without a fight, and fight we shall!" And with that, the gathered host rang out with a unified shout of agreement, and they settled to work out what they could do to stem the power being taken till a solution could be reached. Back on the world where Dominia resided, an envoy was sent to Lassashar to meet with and aid Jerikai. They reached his weary form and tried to bring him back to Dominia, but found that he could not leave the boundaries of Lassashar. According to the Grand Sage of that place, Jerikai needed to remain here until he either ascended once more to the lights, or until he died. For without the divine magic bathing these lands, he could no longer survive. And so he remained, and a permanent outpost was created for the envoys of Dominia, so they could talk with and aid if possible in his recovery. He welcomed the attention and the company, and stated quite sincerely that he would die here in Lassashar, for his host was lost and his body could not contain the essence it held. The envoy, however, had a solution for this, as they knew of how their lights had been created, and of their origins, and told Jerikai all they could about the great vessel that had been crafted, and how it had held them in good stead for an exceptional period of time. Perhaps he too could have one fashioned, so he could travel from this place, or at least preserve his life and knowledge. Jerikai marvelled at the concept. A mortal god traversing the primes held with an object of such magic, still able to be of use to the world, and he accepted. Soon after, a vessel was constructed, much as the original one had been, only this time it was of two facets, that of Jerikai, and that of the unified God, that bore him the news of his new life. And so it came to pass that a new essence crystal was created, only this one was much smaller. In fact, it was so small it could be worn upon the form he currently held, allowing him to remain his familiar body. It was set into a ring of strange material, seemingly silver, yet actually crafted from the very remaining divine essence of the god himself before it could all bleed away. He was effectively wearing himself, or rather his former life. This ring could not be destroyed, it was said, and it would outlast civilizations, allowing him to tread the primes forever, to be a guiding hand from within. Jerikai, it seemed, was a god of law, and was a great loss to Chrylsis and the other host. His knowledge was vast, rivaling that of Thalasiac himself, as he had been the next to be brought into existence after Thalasiac, and as such knew more than any other of the past and all that had transpired. Jerikai added his own incantations and rites to the creation of his salvation, for he was quite knowledgeable on these matters, more so than even they, and in the time long ahead of their plight, this ring would aid many greatly. Jerikai thanked those he referred to as the first demon pantheon, and asked that they let him travel the world so he may see and aid where possible. His form was invulnerable, or rather the ring was, and any harm that befell him would matter not, as the ring would carry him on to a new host, whom he could ride and guide along the right paths. The Pantheon was glad he chose to ride the mortals and aid them where he could, and kept a watchful eye on his travels, to ensure he did not meet an end whereby the ring would fall into the hands of the Nameless. But he did assure them that none of their old kind could even touch the ring, let alone wear it. Such were the incantations he had placed upon it during crafting. He did not wish to be back with the Nameless again, and as he was the only one who had touched those threads and survived, he knew how to ward against it. And so life continued on, with every side working their way to somehow prevent or guard this Nameless from achieving his endgame, but no one really knowing what to do, other than the daily things they were already doing. However, they were all sure that whatever they did it in the plan of stopping his advance.